Hello and welcome to AviaDev Insight Africa, the podcast offering a window to the world of African aviation with your host, John Howell, CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. Today, I am joined by a very special guest, Mr. Patrick Baudis, the Vice President at MHIRJ Aero Advisory Services. This, for those of you who aren't aware, is the commercial aviation consulting function within Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. They will also be present at AviaDev Africa 2022, which is going to take place in Cape Town, the 29th of June to the 1st of July, hosted by the Cape Town Air Access team. So make sure you are registered and attending the event. Today's episode is going to focus on a new report from the group, which identifies 5 major trends that are going to shape African aviation over the next 20 years. We're obviously entering a brand new era of recovery, and the recovery is coming thick and fast. So let's get on with the show and let's find out a little bit more about what these trends are. So Patrick, welcome to the podcast first and foremost.
Yeah, thanks, John. Happy to be. Thanks first for having us in the podcast, and happy to be with you today. So, like you just said, Mitsubishi Aero Advisory. We've been very busy over the last couple of years. We started this team about the same time when Mitsubishi bought the Bombardier commercial aircraft division. Most of our people in the team, we have a team of about 15 people, are coming from Bombardier commercial aircraft. People know us, and we've been very busy because of the pandemic and the support we've been giving to airlines, to lessors, to airports as well. So we've entered from the OEM background that we have. We've entered a different dimension with the consulting, and now a lot of entities and stakeholders in the industry are pulling on us to get support. So, like you said, we just pulled out a document. We will pull out the document. Actually, this is the first time I'm talking publicly about it. It's a kind of a scoop. We've put together a forecast, not a 20-year forecast. Actually, it's a 30-year forecast. That's the big news with this forecast. And I'll come to it a bit. The idea was to continue a bit along the things that we were doing as an OEM in the past, and OEMs do forecast. So we decided to continue that activity, which we have the means and the tools and the people and the knowledge to do. This forecast has some unique features, and I want to go maybe through a few of them. First, it's a behavioral forecast, which means that we're going back to the roots of why people travel, which is basically populations and basins of populations, and wealth and GDP per capita. That's the essence. It's less an econometric model like other forecasts. We are using a very different methodology, which allows us to do a forecast over 30 years, actually, because we're not dependent on projecting past trends so much. We are just using the future predictions on GDP and population growth just to activate our model. And we project to 30 years, which is interesting because 30 years from now will be 2050, and that's a kind of a major milestone for aviation, and we wanted to do that. We also just released another paper on the environment and the sustainability roadmap for aviation, and the 2050 if you want landmark was very important for us to reach. One of the other thing we have is that it's a bottom up and a top down model at the same time. That allows us to go, region by region, but also city pair by city pair, and have a very narrow view of the aviation industry in the next 20 to 30 years. We have implemented a new route model, basically to how airlines develop new routes. We'll maybe talk about it for Africa. There's interesting things that we've seen for Africa. Because of the methodology we're using, we have this new route development model, which is very powerful. And last but not least, we have a probabilistic approach to retirements. Usually people say in forecast that after X years, like 25 years, the airplane is retired and then a new plane comes in. We have a different approach whereby we just say, at 20 years, there's a likelihood of X% for an airplane to be retired and so on and so forth, right? So anyway, so in a nutshell, very unique, very different approach to forecasting, which makes it interesting because we end up looking at things differently sometimes from others. Like I said, for instance, the route development.
Yeah, I love that approach. Thank you for sort of outlining how you've gone about it, what the methodology is. Obviously, our listeners will know the Bombardier team from bringing the CRJ 900, the Uganda Airlines plane, to the welcome reception at AviaDev in 2019, which feels like a long time ago. It was 3 years ago, but it was a wonderful experience. And I think absolutely what you say. We see the OEM predictions and we see their annual reports with what's going to be required. And again, as you say, that's only any good if yesterday or tomorrow looks like yesterday. That's when looking at previous data. So to change that up and look at behavioral, look into the future a bit further, and 30 years is longer than most of these reports look, and I made that mistake of saying 20, and it is 30 years. So let's dive a bit deeper into that. You've identified 5 key trends that are going to impact the development of African aviation. As you said, this is an exclusive. The report will be available and we'll share that in the next couple of weeks once it's actually out there. But can you outline at top level what those 5 trends are?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's many trends in Africa. So we had to pick, the 5 most important that we're seeing and we're anticipating in the next years. First, the first one is probably profitability, and the fact that it's still very difficult for airlines to in Africa to reach that level of profitability, in particular after a crisis like we've seen, and what we see is that the change that we are going to see within the structure of the fleets in the future will help that profitability moving forward for African carriers. This change will ensure more connectivity in the continent, and will strengthen the domestic and intra-regional traffic, which is essential to profitability in every airline system. The second is the regional connectivity. We see a huge potential in Africa for connecting within the region the different countries. This is in our forecast. What we see is the doubling of the number of routes within the region. So when I was talking about the model approaching the things differently, we can see a lot of new routes being developed in the continent through that model, simply because of the growth of population and the growth of GDP. The population, I'll come to it, it's one of the points, will grow very, very fast. The wealth as well for the region. This will enable, of course, the developments of aviation, but also new routes within the continent. The intra-regional, just to put things in perspective, the intra-regional traffic within the region by 2040, so 20 years only from now, will be 4 times bigger than the traffic to the next region, which will be at that time Middle East and North Africa, just above Europe. So it's going to be massive. I think this development, it's big today. It's going to be even bigger in the future. That will be helped by the intra-regional trade expansion. There is we see a boost in the intra-Africa trade through the different initiatives. It's difficult, it's long, it's painful. It's like it's like any of these trade unions. Over time, it took a while for Europe to go down that path, for any other regions to go through that thing. But when you reach the level where you can boost your trade, that is a fantastic enabler for more GDP and for more traffic, obviously. So all the initiatives, ECOWAS, EAC, all that, the more they will develop, the better it will improve the traffic. Then we've got 2, I think it's kind of a paradox for the regions. We see 2 opposite trends. One is more partnerships through either foreign carriers outside the region or within the region, more partnerships between airlines. Good examples, what Ethiopian's doing, but also what Qatar is doing with other airlines in the regions like Rwandair and so on. And at the same time, we see another trend, which is the revival of national carriers. Maybe we can talk about that later, but these two trends seems to be opposite, and they are very good reasons why they will coexist in the future. And we can talk about that maybe a bit later. And the last trend we see is really this massive growth. I mean, Africa will be the first region in terms of growth of population in the world. The highest growth will be in Africa for the population, and one of the highest for the wealth as well, for GDP. This is great because this is and that's again for the GDP. It's not us. We not predict that. We use Oxford Economics as a base for our econometric numbers, and when you see that and their forecast, it will drive a lot of traffic, because these are the fundamental elements to drive traffic. It's population size and GDP per capita. So enough said on that. I mean, just on that, just a number. The population will grow by 2.4% more or less over the next 20 years, and the GDP will grow by 3.5%, which is very, very high. As well for the region, so that will clearly boost.
Amazing. I love all of that because it's all positive, isn't it? As well. I mean, you say growing middle class, growing population, the intra-African market becoming 4 times bigger. I look at this is where AviaDev began, because we looked at where Europe is in terms of its proportion of traffic that is intra-European or the US or Asia. It's so high compared to Africa, and that's where the opportunity lies. Is better domestic, better inter-regional connectivity first, and let's do the international continental connectivity when the opportunities are there, or allow other carriers to do that, but focus on the market closer to home. So I want to come back to that first point, because it actually plays to your point and your experience with Bombardier and with an OEM, etc., which is all about finding the right sized aircraft to drive profitability in Africa. So let's talk about fleet development. How is the mix of aircraft in operation going to change over this time period, in the short term, medium term, and over the 30 years? And which segment is going to see the biggest growth?
So that's the interesting part, because the fleet structure in Africa will change dramatically. I'd say in the next 20 and 30 years, it will start to shift 10 years from now, to be honest, but obviously growing. What we're seeing is an upgauging in the continent. There's today a lot of small single aisle and regional airplanes, and it's been over the last 6 years, we've seen already a change of attitude from airlines in the continent. It used to be the case that airlines were opening an airline and were just opening first long-haul routes with wide bodies. And if you do that, and if you don't have the feed, it's probably a big recipe for failure, unless you have locally a massive amount of traffic, which is usually not the case to drive that service. So you need the feed. You need to fill those big planes. You need the feed, and to feed, you need small airplanes to start with, and that's what airlines have been doing over the last few years. It's to get back into the right sizing. More regional airplanes, more small single aisles. And what we see moving forward is a gradual shift from those fleets towards large narrow bodies. There's 2 reasons for that. Like we just said, first, some of these airplanes will be replaced by bigger modules. Some regional airplanes will be replaced by small single aisles. Then that will be replaced themselves by large narrow bodies. The population is driving that. More and more population drives bigger airplane. The other element which is a fact. It's the fact that the continent is big, and some of these airplanes start to be too small for catching the traffic and feeding the traffic. It's fine for domestic traffic. When you want to go beyond that, you need larger airplanes, like large narrow bodies, to just tap into a wider network basin. So we'll see a shift, and basically what we see over the next, and just 20 years, we see on the next 20 years about 3 times the fleet of large narrow bodies will grow 3 times, will triple over the period. Today you've got about 100 airplanes in that category in service. It will go to 300 plus airplanes in 20 years from now. That's massive. Like I said, that will be at the expense of the share of regional airplanes. In fact, the regional fleet will more or less stay the same, but the share will reduce, obviously, mathematically. So the regional fleet will about stay the same, and the wide body fleet and the small single aisle fleet will grow by about 50% over the period. So in total, we end up with a situation where we have about a need for 800 airplanes, 830 actually, to be precise, over the 20 years. Again, looking just at 20 years, 830 units for the region, spread, like I said, 18% for wide bodies, 30% for large narrow bodies, 25% for small single aisles, and another 25% for the regional airplanes, and today the shift is very the split is very, very different. So the fleet in total will grow by about 50% over the next 20 years.
What's the difference between what's going to be in as replacement and what's actually coming in for growth as well in terms of that 830?
So in the 830 we get about I would say 60% is going to be replacement. There's still aging fleets in Africa that will need replacement, and that drives as well a lot of the deliveries in the next 20 years. And about 40% will be growth. And again, that's a big number. But the growth will be, like I said, mainly on the narrow bodies. We see over 200 narrow bodies being needed just for growth. In total, it's 300 narrow bodies needed, but just for growth, it's 200 plus narrow bodies that will be needed in the next 20 years.
So that's the section and the segment of the market to watch out for sure. So let's have a look at that regional connectivity.
Sure.
We've talked about kind of the fleet mix, but I'm always interested with any of these forecasts. How do you actually factor in SATAM? We've sat here for 35 years. We're still waiting. Do you factor this in that, hey, look, SATAM will be here this year, next year? Because, of course, it's not actually a reality. How do you account for it? And, where do you sort of, you also, of course, focus, tell us a little bit more. You focus a bit on the West Africa to South Africa market as well as a real growth opportunity. So if you can address both of those points for us, that'd be great.
Sure. So the way it works for our forecast is, first we estimate the traffic, and from the traffic we estimate the number of airplanes in a simple way, very top level, helicopter view. But we use socioeconomic, if you want, factors and developments to do that. We are not considering any constraints or any enablers, I'd say, for the forecast, and everyone does that, because if you start to implement to include some big assumptions like this, you're going to start to distort the picture. Obviously, some OEMs, to be honest, do that because they have a past and they have something to market, but we don't, and we see this as taking a position, if you want. I take an example. If we start to consider the infrastructure constraints, for instance, we are basically decided in the name of airports that they should not invest on the infrastructure, and by that, we would distort, if you want, the picture, and assume decisions that have to be made by other people. So our forecast is unconstrained. Okay, and it means that I'm talking about the global forecast. That doesn't mean that we can do scenarios. And obviously, on demand, and that's what we do for people that want to use our forecasting capability. We get in an environment, whether it is for an airport or for an airline or whomever, and we can say, listen, we can do a forecast where we, for instance, simulate the impact of the SAATM, and through that, what does that mean? We make assumptions with, methodology. We make assumptions of a higher GDP, because what these things will do, it will create more wealth. If you want, GDP will grow within that scenario, and then through that scenario, you get more traffic. You get then more airplanes. For instance, you could do an opposite scenario where you would say, no, there won't be any of this in the future, or there will be actually, breaks on that with countries closing their borders and things like that from a trade perspective. And then you do a pessimistic scenario. So that's how we do scenarios. So in the global forecast we are releasing, there are no constraints like that. We're highlighting the trends. Okay, we're talking about those trends, but we're not considering them simply because of that. We could, but otherwise we would it would become scenarios and no longer a forecast. Which means, by the way, when you think about it, that the numbers we're projecting are could be conservative. It could be seen as conservative because these initiatives are in the make, and if they happen, that will certainly change the GDP forecast and then change the picture for the region for good. Coming back to your second part of your question, which is the West and South Africa link. We anticipating, I talked a lot about the route developments. We're anticipating a lot of routes being developed between these two sectors, these two subregions. And the reason is very simple. These are big population basins where we anticipate, when we look at country by country, a lot of wealth coming up. So this is the perfect, recipe for traffic. And today, those two subregions are very badly connected, actually. Very often when you fly from one region, or you want to fly from one region to the other, you need to go through a hub which is at best in eastern part of Africa, at worst in the Middle East or even Europe, which makes no sense, right? So we see through our new model methodology, new route methodology, and we see a lot of routes opportunities between these two regions. We think a lot of airlines will be developing those routes, and that is also fueling the single aisle need, because this still very far apart. You still need a certain range to reach those regions, which is all these new single aisles are capable of, and that will drive also some of the growth in that aircraft segment between the two regions. So all the regions will, the connectivity in Africa will increase, but these two regions in particular, because of their population, because of their GDP growth, and their distances.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, and it is baffling. You think about Nigeria as a population center in South Africa.
Yeah, the
lack of connectivity and Absolutely. The opportunity for the Nigerian carriers to look at some of the South African markets, I think, is really important. And obviously the visa issues are getting better, I believe, and these kind of things. There's more trade links, Absolutely. So it's definitely one to watch, and it's something we'll be looking at AviaDev as well this year. So before I let you go, I want to come back to the point that you made about the partnerships, because we're a massive advocate of let's work together, let's collaborate, let's partner, and we've seen a huge increase in terms of interlines, code shares, alliances even that are being talked about now with SAA and KQ and some of the other airlines as well. So I want to sort of have a bit of a chat about how you see the role of the Middle Eastern carriers. Will they continue to control access to and from the continent? And will they be more involved in kind of equity partnerships like they've done before with Air Seychelles, with Etihad and those kind of things? Or Qatar with Rwandair, which is on the table at the moment? Or will we still see these standalone national carrier projects that kind of want to go out on their own? How do you see that landscape? Because I think this is one of the most fascinating things.
So that's interesting, because that's probably unique in the world. This situation, we're not seeing that elsewhere, where we have these two, I would say, paradoxical trends, opposite trends, developing side by side. And the reasons are, the fundamental reasons are the following. If there are pros and cons for each. If you partner, and even more if a foreign airline is having a stake in your airline, national airline, you are less in control of where the traffic is going to go, because to a certain extent, and in particular for the airlines which are outside the region, they are investing in an airline to also feed their network system. It's a give and take, right? So you're less in control. You have a risk that the development of your national airline goes a certain way, but it goes with good things as well. These Middle Eastern carriers come with usually deep pockets, and the cash you may need at government level and the expertise you may need to acquire as well can be brought in extremely easily through those partnerships. On the other side, you've got the opposite direction, which is I'm a country, I want to set up my own national carrier because I want to be in control of the traffic. Some of this has been triggered as well by what happened in the pandemic, where countries have seen the importance sometimes of trying to better control the goods, to better control the people movements in a country. By having control of that. So it's not that there's one recipe for the continent at the moment. We're really seeing a lot of new airlines established, new national airlines being established by countries. But at the same time, we see other countries deciding to go kind of an opposite way and deciding to partner, deciding to leverage on other airlines, operational expertise, cash injection as well, to go quicker in terms of development and develop their air service much faster. And it's funny because we see really both trends at the same time growing, and it's been for a few years. It's not just during the pandemic. It started before the pandemic. We started to see already a renewal of national carriers, the rise of those, with new sometimes startups or airlines deciding that this airline would become their national carrier, for instance. But at the same time, we've seen also partnership from others. So who's going to win? What's going to be the winning formula? It's really difficult to predict at the moment, and it really depends on each country's wish to attract people and the international trade, actually. So some countries are happy with leaving that control to some extent, or to other airlines, and getting access quicker through their expertise to more traffic and a more dynamic situation on the train and the passenger movement and the cargo. On the other side, other countries want to control that and develop it to their own wish.
Yeah, I think
so that's what we see. We see these two opposite trends moving forward, really side by side so far. So, will there be a winner? The future.
Yeah, I think you're right, and you've outlined it really well. It's very situational. We saw an airline like Air Namibia fold during the pandemic after years and years of bailouts. And actually, has Namibia struggled and suffered from a connectivity perspective? Not really. They have a new private airline, Fly Namibia, Airlink providing connectivity in Southern Africa, and they have Eurowings providing the connectivity from Europe, all without paying through the taxpayers. So they've done that. Zambia have partnered with Ethiopian to do Zambia Airways. So they've they've worked with a local partner, with an African partner. Rwandair are going to work with Qatar Airways. They've gone with an international partner. Eswatini has set up its own airline during the pandemic and is about to launch. So, each country's looking at it, like you say, but I suppose it comes down to those things. It's control. And then it's also, can we afford to do this? And is there a market to make this viable? Because sometimes there has to be an understanding that if we have a national airline, it's going to be very difficult to make it profitable unless we do X, Y, and Z. And they're the things. So I think it's a really fascinating landscape. You have to look at it on a case by case, country by country basis.
Absolutely.
I'm really, really looking forward to reading the full report and sharing it with all of our listeners once it's out. But, thanks so much for kind of outlining those key trends for us, Patrick. There's so much more we can talk about, and we will over the next few months. So for everybody listening, we will put a link as soon as we can when the report is finalized. But this is an exclusive. So have a listen to this. This will whet your appetite. And as soon as it's launched, we'll let everybody know. But thank you so much, Patrick, for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you, John, for having us. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. So thank you, everybody out there, for listening. Don't forget that if you haven't yet, make sure you get yourself registered for the Only Air Service Development event for Africa, which is driving air connectivity to, from, and within the African continent and taking advantage of all of these trends that Patrick and I have been talking about today. The event's taking place in Cape Town this June, 29th of June to the 1st of July. And if you did enjoy this podcast, please do share it with somebody you think would benefit from having a listen. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and we will see you for the next episode very soon. Thank you all for joining us. Take care. Bye-bye.